It was the winter of 2018, a quiet, frozen night in Illinois. My husband and I had taken our son, Luke, to visit our old friends, Tim and Rachel. Their little girl, Emily, had never spoken in her life. Not one sound, not one word. But when Luke leaned in and whispered something softly in her ear, she looked straight at him and said this one word that made her parents scream and drop everything. If you believe faith can still move the impossible, like this video, and tell me where you're watching from tonight. Now let me take you back to how it all began. It was December 23, 2022, a Friday morning that had that dull, pewter light Midwest winters are known for, where even the air seems tired. My name's Lisa Reynolds. I'm 37, and I work the front counter of the hardware store my husband, Mark, runs in our small Illinois town. We open early before sunrise, because the farmers like to pick up salt and snow shovels before heading out. The radio plays quietly behind the register, all talk of last-minute shopping and record-breaking cold fronts. I know the lines by heart. I mouth them while I wipe the counter for no reason other than habit. Mark's in the back, unpacking a shipment of extension cords, and our 8-year-old son, Luke, is sitting by the window drawing on the fogged glass with his finger. He's bundled in his navy winter coat, even though it's warm inside. He says the coat feels like quiet. That's Luke. He was born on Christmas Eve, during the worst blizzard we'd had in 20 years. The hospital lights flickered when I went into labor, and a nurse got stranded there until morning. Everyone called him a Christmas miracle baby. I used to laugh when people said that. Now I'm not sure laughter ever fit the story. He's not a loud child, not rude or shy, just still. The kind of stillness that draws attention without asking for it. He notices things no one else does. When I drop a spoon, he says, "That's the sound of something trying to get your attention." When the power flickers, he stops mid-sentence and listens, like he's hearing something we aren't tuned to. His teachers say he's thoughtful. They mean strange. That morning, while Mark counted cash for the deposit, Luke said, "It's going to snow again tonight." I looked up at the clear sky and told him the forecast said otherwise. He just shrugged. Forecasts don't see feelings. It's the kind of thing he says that makes you smile and ache at the same time. Around noon, Mark mentioned that we'd better start packing for the weekend. Our old college friends, Rachel and Tim Collins, had invited us up to Rockford. "You remember Rachel," he said, half buried in a shelf of bolts. "The one who made those burnt brownies freshman year." I did remember. Back then she was loud and funny, and had a laugh that could fill a dorm hallway. We hadn't seen them in years, not since they'd moved for Tim's job. The invitation had come by email in early December, short, polite, almost desperate in tone. "We'd love to see you. Emily still talks about Christmas stories. Come if you can." Emily was their daughter, 5 years old. I knew from Rachel's last message that she'd never spoken, not a single word since birth. Doctors had given up trying to name her condition. They'd done therapy, scans, specialists, but no one could fix silence. When I read that line, "She still hasn't spoken," I sat for a long time staring at the computer screen. I wanted to reply something comforting, but there are some kinds of sorrow words can't touch. By late afternoon, we'd packed the trunk, suitcases, wrapped gifts, Luke's small backpack with his sketchbook and crayons. He asked if we could bring his snow globe, the one he got from his grandmother with the small church inside. "I like when it snows, even if I don't shake it," he said. I tucked it in his bag. The drive north took 3 hours, gray sky fading into twilight, fields blanketed in snow, the occasional radio crackle reminding us to drive slow on icy bridges. Luke hummed quietly in the back seat, a tune I didn't recognize. Mark tapped the steering wheel in rhythm. When we passed the "Welcome to Rockford" sign, flakes began to fall, light at first, then thick enough to blur the headlights. "Guess you were right," I said. Luke just smiled faintly. "It's a listening snow," he said. Rachel's house stood at the end of a quiet street, a wide colonial with soft yellow light spilling from the windows. Wreath on the door, two reindeer in the yard, the kind of scene you'd find on a Christmas card if not for the feeling, that tired sort of warmth people build to keep something darker out. Rachel opened the door before we even knocked. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, eyes lined from sleepless years. "Lisa," she said, hugging me so hard I could feel her ribs. "You made it." Tim followed behind her, smiling politely, holding 2 mugs of cider. "Long drive?" he asked. I nodded, brushing snow from my coat. The house smelled like cinnamon and wood polish. Christmas lights blinked unevenly on a small tree in the corner. Then I saw her, Emily. Small, pale, standing just beyond the living room doorway, hands gripping the hem of her red sweater. She looked at Luke first. Didn't wave, didn't speak, just stared. Luke stared back, expression soft, unreadable. Then he smiled, not the kind of grin most boys give, but a calm, knowing look, as if he'd already been waiting for this exact meeting. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. Rachel and I tried to reminisce. College roommates, old stories, but everything felt forced. She laughed at the right places, but her voice trembled. Mark asked Tim about work. Luke sat beside Emily at the corner of the table, cutting his food carefully, occasionally glancing at her, never speaking first. When he did talk, it was to ask, "Do you like snow?" Emily's head turned toward him, and she nodded slowly. Rachel dropped her fork. "She understood that," she whispered. By 8, snow was falling heavily. The wind made the windows creak. Rachel said the kids could play outside for a few minutes before bedtime. I hesitated, watching Luke pull on his coat. "Be careful," I said. He nodded. "Always." We watched from the window for a while. 2 small shapes in the yard, breath visible, snow crunching under boots. Luke showed Emily how to catch flakes on her glove. Then he knelt to draw something in the snow with his finger. Emily crouched beside him. The porch light threw a soft glow across their faces, and for a moment everything looked almost unreal, like a still photograph. Then something shifted, a stillness deeper than quiet. I felt it before I saw it. Luke leaned close to Emily, said something I couldn't hear. Her face changed. Her lips moved once, twice, then parted, and sound came out. At first it was only a breath, a half hum, then a single word. "Luke." I froze. The wine glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the tile. The sound startled Mark, who turned and followed my gaze. Rachel's chair scraped the floor as she ran to the door. We burst outside together, boots sinking into fresh snow. Emily stood in the open yard, flakes sticking to her hair, cheeks pink from cold, eyes wide with something like wonder. She spoke again, louder. "Luke!" Rachel fell to her knees, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. "Say it again, baby," she cried. "Please, say it again." Emily did, over and over, the name repeating like a song. Tim rushed out behind us, fumbling with his phone, recording through shaking hands. Mark whispered, "Oh my God." I turned toward Luke. He was standing a few feet away, calm as ever, hands at his sides, snow clinging to his lashes. He looked not proud, not scared, just still. When I reached him, I grabbed his hand. "Luke," I said, voice breaking, "what did you do?" He looked up at me, eyes reflecting the porch light, the falling snow, maybe something more. "She was scared," he said softly, so I told her she wasn't alone. I felt the warmth through his glove, not heat from his skin, something steadier, deeper, like a pulse beneath everything. For a moment, even the wind seemed to stop. The porch light flickered, and the snow in the air shimmered faintly, just enough for all of us to notice. Rachel kept crying, holding Emily so tightly the girl laughed through her tears. Tim whispered. Do you see this? Do you see what's happening? Mark's hand found my shoulder. None of us spoke again for a long time. The night deepened, the sky pale gray against the white earth. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed, then faded. Emily's small voice echoed once more through the air, fragile but certain. And I remember thinking, this is what a miracle sounds like when it forgets to announce itself. The next morning, the world outside was white and hushed, the kind of hush that only follows a deep snow. I remember waking up before anyone else, lying still, listening to the slow tick of the old clock on the hallway wall, and wondering if I'd dreamed the night before. For a few seconds, I almost convinced myself I had. Then I heard something, a faint murmur, a small voice, a child's voice. At first I thought it was the TV, but when I stepped into the hallway, I realized it was coming from the kitchen. Rachel was sitting at the table, hair still tangled from sleep, her robe half open, one hand pressed over her mouth. Emily sat across from her in a booster seat, flipping through a picture book, pointing, naming things in that soft, shaky little girl voice that can break a grown person's heart. Dog, chair, apple, snow. Rachel's shoulders were trembling, tears falling straight down. No sound, no sobbing. She was whispering, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." I stood there frozen, the smell of coffee and butter thick in the air, the morning light falling in through the frosted window, and all I could think was that I shouldn't even be here, that I was intruding on something sacred. Then Emily looked up and saw me. She smiled and said, "Hi." That word felt like a bell ringing in a church I didn't know I'd been standing in. I walked in slowly, trying to steady my breath. "Good morning," I said, and I sounded like a stranger in my own voice. Rachel turned toward me, mascara smudged, eyes red. "Lisa," she whispered. "She's talking. She's really talking." I reached for a chair but didn't sit. My legs felt hollow. "How long?" I asked. "She's been saying words since she woke up," Rachel said, voice breaking. She pointed at the snow outside and said, "White." Then she pointed at me and said, "Mom." That one word, Mom, hit me harder than anything else could have. A few minutes later, Tim came in with his hair sticking up, still half asleep. He stopped when he saw Emily, blinking, confused. "Hey, kiddo," he said, his voice careful. Emily turned to him, grinning wide, and said, "Daddy." He dropped the mug in his hand. It hit the tile and shattered, but he didn't even notice. He just stood there, his face folding like something too full to hold itself up. Mark came down soon after, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" he asked, and Rachel grabbed his arm so hard I thought she'd bruise him. "She's talking, Mark. She's talking." Luke wandered in last, his hair messy, dragging his blanket like he always did when he'd just woken up. He looked at Emily and smiled, quiet and knowing. She smiled back and said, "Luke." The word was clear as glass. Everyone went still. No one breathed. I thought Rachel might faint. Tim started pacing, muttering, "How? How is this happening?" And I just stood there watching Luke, who didn't seem surprised at all. He just climbed up into a chair and poured himself a bowl of cereal. "Luke," I said, my voice unsteady, "Honey, do you remember what you said to her last night?" He looked up from his spoon. "She was afraid of her own voice," he said softly. "I told her she didn't have to be." I didn't know what to say to that. None of us did. Later that morning, Rachel insisted we take Emily to her speech therapist in town. She needed someone else to hear it, to confirm it was real, that this wasn't some beautiful hallucination. So we bundled up the kids, scraping the ice from the car windows, the kind of quiet that fills up when no one wants to ruin the fragile thing holding them together. The drive was slow, the world covered in white. I remember the windshield wipers squeaking and the smell of Rachel's vanilla lotion filling the car. Emily hummed softly to herself in the back seat, swinging her legs, while Luke stared out the window like he was looking somewhere far beyond the trees. When we got to the clinic, the therapist, Dr. Martin, looked shocked just to see Emily walk in smiling. She started the session right there in the waiting area, like she couldn't wait. "Emily, can you tell me what this is?" she asked, holding up a plastic ball. "Ball," Emily said, clear and certain. Dr. Martin's pen froze mid-air. She blinked and tried again, holding up a picture of a house. "And this?" "House." Tim was filming with his phone, trying not to cry. Rachel stood behind him, hands pressed to her chest. I sat with Luke beside me, my knees shaking. After a few minutes, Dr. Martin just sat down on the carpet beside Emily, like she'd given up trying to measure it. "She has full word recall," she said quietly, "and control. I can't explain this. This doesn't happen overnight." I looked over at Luke, who was watching Emily intently. He wasn't smiling, just present, like someone listening for something the rest of us couldn't hear. When we left, Dr. Martin hugged Rachel and said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Rachel laughed through tears, saying, "We didn't do anything." That afternoon, back at the house, we all sat around the living room fire, not talking much. The adults were drained. Tim put on a record, old Christmas hymns still on the turntable from the week before, and Emily lay on the rug tracing her finger along the lines of a picture book. Luke sat beside her again, building a tower out of blocks. Mark leaned toward me quietly. "Do you think it's a miracle?" he whispered. I didn't answer right away. "I think," I said finally, "that sometimes we see something good and spend the rest of our lives trying to find the right word for it." He nodded, his jaw tight. "And if people find out?" "They won't," I said too fast. "This stays here, between us." But deep down, I knew that wasn't how life worked. Word always finds a way to travel. After dinner, I went to check on Luke. He was sitting on the bed with his sketchbook open, drawing circles again. Big ones, small ones, connected by faint lines, like ripples in water. "What's that?" I asked, sitting beside him. "It's how sound moves," he said. "You can't see it, but it's there." I asked what he meant. He looked up at me with those steady eyes that somehow belonged to both a child and something far older. "When someone listens," he said, "sound finds its way home." That line sat in my heart for days. I didn't understand it, but it felt true. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, the house silent except for the hum of the heater. Snow kept falling, soft and endless. I thought about Emily's voice, about Luke's calm, about the way fear had melted from Rachel's face when she heard her daughter say "Mom." I thought I knew what miracles were supposed to look like. Loud, shining, obvious. But that night taught me they sound like something else entirely. Like a whisper breaking years of silence. Like a small voice in a quiet kitchen saying a single word that changes everything. And I remember thinking, as I sat there in the dark, maybe the hardest part about miracles isn't believing they happen. Maybe it's learning to live in the silence that follows them, and trusting that silence to mean something good. Weeks passed after that night at Rachel's, and though life pretended to return to normal, something beneath it had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the same quiet way a house settles after a storm. You don't notice the shift until one night the floor creaks, and you realize it's never sounded that way before. I remember one morning, early January, when I woke to the smell of coffee and heard Mark humming in the kitchen. The heater was humming too, steady as ever. Luke was at the table, pencil in hand, drawing again, the same loops and ripples that I'd started calling his sound maps. When I asked what he was working on, he said, "I'm drawing what I hear." "What you hear?" I asked, thinking maybe he meant the hum of the furnace or the radio on low. He shook his head. "No, the prayers." I laughed softly, thinking he was pretending, and ruffled his hair. But when I looked closer at the paper, I noticed something strange. Each swirl had tiny dots along its edge, like syllables written in a language that didn't belong to us. I thought it was just a child's imagination. I wasn't even close. That week, our old cat, Clover, stopped eating. She'd been fading for months. Arthritis, the vet said. Maybe her kidneys. She wouldn't drink, wouldn't purr. I'd already picked out the day we'd take her in. But one afternoon, Luke found her curled up under the radiator, breathing shallow. He sat beside her for a long time, his hand resting on her back. He didn't say much, just whispered softly, like he was talking to a friend. When I walked in that night, she was standing in the kitchen, tail twitching, eating from her bowl like she'd never been sick. Mark stared, fork midair. "Maybe she just turned a corner," he said. But the vet had called it irreversible. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. A few days later came the blizzard. The kind that makes the world disappear. Snow falling so thick you can't tell where the air ends and the ground begins. We lost power around 9. The street went black. Only the distant orange glow of a few porch lights fading out one by one. Mark went to check the breaker box while I gathered candles. But before I could light one, I realized the house was still warm. Not just warm, gently, evenly heated, as if the furnace hadn't stopped at all. I checked the thermostat. Dead screen. Checked the outlets. Nothing. Yet the air held that faint metallic scent of electricity, like the moment before lightning strikes. "Mark," I called. "Something's wrong, or right. I don't know." He came up with a flashlight, shaking his head. "There's no power, Lise. None. The whole street's out." And still the radiators hummed, low and calm, like someone had left the world turned on just for us. That night I couldn't sleep. I started writing things down, at first just to keep track, to stop my mind from spinning. The notebook was small, blue-covered, with a tear in the corner. I wrote the date, time, and what happened. January 9th, Luke said, "Storm coming," before the weather changed. January 14th, Clover ate again. January 18th, heater worked with power off. And later, as the pages filled, January 20th, he dreams of snow that falls upward. January 24th, he said he hears prayers. I don't know why I wrote that one down. Maybe because of how ordinary his voice sounded when he said it. You think you'll remember every detail when strange things happen, but memory softens it. Writing was the only way I could hold on. Then one night near the end of January, another storm came. Thick, heavy flakes, the kind that glow against the porch light. We were finishing dinner when Luke suddenly looked up, his fork hovering midair. "Someone's outside," he said. I froze. "Outside where?" He pointed toward the window. "By Mr. Donnelly's driveway." Mark frowned, went to look, and came back pale. "Stay here." He grabbed his coat and flashlight. I followed, boots crunching through the snow. The beam of light cut through white haze, and there, half buried, collapsed by the edge of his shovel, was Mr. Donnelly, our elderly neighbor. His hat had fallen off, his face blue-gray. Mark knelt beside him, shouting his name, while I ran for the phone. The paramedic said another 2 minutes, and it would have been too late. His pulse was threadbare, his hands rigid from cold. They got him into the ambulance, and I remember the look one of them gave me, half relief, half disbelief. "How did you know?" he asked. I said I didn't. But later, when the chaos settled, I turned to Luke. "How did you know he was out there?" He shrugged lightly, almost shy. "He called me." I wanted to ask what he meant, what kind of call, but something in his tone stopped me. It wasn't evasive. It was simple. matter of fact, the way you'd say the color of the sky. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the notebook. The radiator ticked softly, and for the first time in years, I whispered a prayer without thinking first. Not one for answers, just a plea for understanding. If this is you, I said quietly, show me what to do. Then right as I spoke it, the light above the stove flickered on. Just ours. The rest of the neighborhood stayed dark. I thought my heart would stop. I just sat there, breathing, staring at that small circle of light glowing against the kitchen wall. That's when the wonder turned heavy. Because awe, real awe, the kind that sits on your chest and won't leave, comes with fear too. Not fear of danger, fear of being seen. After that, Mark started pulling away a bit. Not cruelly, just quietly. He'd talk less, work longer hours. People will talk, Lise, he said one night, rubbing his temples. You start telling stories like this, they'll think we've lost it. I'm not telling anyone, I said. But my voice shook, because I'd already written everything down, and somehow writing felt like confessing. He sighed. It's just hysteria. That's what it is. The kid's good, he's sensitive, but all this, he waved a hand, it's just snow and timing. I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to. But then I'd see Luke sitting by the window again, his breath fogging the glass, eyes soft, distant. Sometimes he'd hum, that same tune I'd first heard in the car after Emily spoke. Sometimes he'd say things like, she's okay now, or the light's almost done, without explanation. And even now, all these years later, I can still feel that quiet between us at night. Me at the sink washing dishes, Mark reading by the fire, and Luke in his room drawing sound on paper. Spring finally came. The snow melted in slow patches, the ground soggy and brown. We told ourselves things were normal again. Mark even signed Luke up for Little League. Watching him out there, laughing, running bases, for a moment I almost believed it. But I'd changed. Something in me had shifted for good. One afternoon, when the thaw had just started, I got a call from Rachel. You need to see this, she said, her voice thick with emotion. She sent me a short video, Emily in her kindergarten classroom, singing Silent Night with the other kids. The sound was small, off-key, beautiful. And near the end, she looked straight at the camera and said, he told me I wasn't alone. I had to sit down. That evening, I drove to Rachel's house. We sat in her living room. No pretense left between us. She told me how, for months after that night, she couldn't look at Luke without feeling jealous. Jealous of me, of his calm, of the peace he carried like it was something you could touch. I used to wish Emily could just be ordinary, she said. Now I think I wish too small. I told her I used to wish Luke could be ordinary too. But I'd trade every miracle, I said, for his peace. Rachel shook her head. Don't, she said softly. The world needs both. That summer, Luke and I walked along the lake one evening. The air was thick with the smell of rain, the sky painted gold and rose. He was taller then, leaner, freckles across his nose. We walked in silence for a while before I asked what I'd been carrying in my chest for years. Luke, I said, what did you whisper to Emily that night? The very first time? He kicked a pebble into the water, watched the ripples spread. She couldn't hear herself, he said quietly. I just told her he could. He, I asked, but he didn't look at me. He just smiled faintly and said, everyone needs to know that once. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I opened the old notebook again. Most of the pages were filled now, ink fading, corners soft from turning. At the very end, I wrote one last line. Miracles don't shout. They wait. And I realized something. It was never about proof. It never was. The miracle wasn't the sound of Emily's voice, or the warmth in a powerless house, or even the lives spared by chance. It was the peace that followed, the stillness that stayed when the wonder quieted down. It's been years now, but I still keep that notebook in my bedside drawer. Sometimes, when the night feels too quiet, I open it and run my fingers over the ink. The words don't glow or hum. They just rest there, patient, like they're listening too. And that's enough for me. I've thought about that winter for most of my life now. The way silence felt alive. The way fear and wonder could live in the same breath. And sometimes, when I remember those nights, the sound of snow pressing against the windows, Luke's calm voice in the dark, I realize that faith isn't something we build from certainty. It's what we hold on to when certainty leaves. I used to think miracles were interruptions, proof that God had stepped in for a moment to fix what was broken. But now, I think they're reminders instead. Gentle reminders that He never left in the first place. That maybe the point isn't to see something extraordinary, but to recognize the holy inside what's ordinary. A child's whisper, a neighbor's rescue, a quiet peace that stays long after the light fades. I know not everyone will believe what happened in that house, and maybe they don't have to. Because faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about choosing to keep listening, even when the world goes still. It's about believing that love moves quietly through the cracks of our ordinary days, shaping things we'll never understand. And if I've learned anything from Luke, it's this. Miracles don't need applause. They just need witnesses. People willing to stop, to see, and to say, I was there when light came through the dark. Before you go, take a second to like this video if you still believe small miracles can change a life. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder that hope is still alive. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of faith, mercy, and quiet grace. Thank you for watching. God bless you. And may you never stop noticing the gentle ways God still speaks. Not through thunder, but through the still, small voice that waits for someone to listen.